Please subscribe to the channel to help us reach our goal of 1,000 subscribers. Today, I'm going to share an experience that still haunts me to this day. It happened about a year ago, and to be honest, I've struggled to wrap my head around it ever since. Many people have heard my story and brushed it off as mere fiction, but I assure you, every word of it is true. There were times when even I doubted my own sanity, questioning whether it had all been a vivid dream. But now, with the clarity of hindsight, I am absolutely certain that every chilling moment was real. It all began when our documentary crew decided to venture into an abandoned city, a place frozen in time, untouched for decades. The city was eerily preserved, as if its inhabitants had simply vanished mid-task, leaving behind a ghostly echo of their former lives. As we delved deeper into the silent streets, we began to sense an unsettling presence, a feeling that we were not alone. Something sinister lurked in the shadows, watching our every move, and it was determined not to let us leave without a fight. The van rumbled along the uneven road, kicking up dust as we approached the outskirts of the abandoned city. The anticipation in the air was palpable, a mix of excitement and dread churning in my stomach. I glanced at Emily, our director, who was gripping the steering wheel with a determined look on her face. Beside me, Chris fiddled with his audio equipment, and Laura scribbled notes in her ever-present notebook. As we crested a hill, the city came into view. It was eerily untouched, as if time had stood still. The buildings, though worn by the elements, still stood proudly, a testament to a once thriving community. But there was no sign of life, no movement, no sound, just an unsettling silence that seemed to envelop the entire area. We parked the van at the edge of the city and stepped out, the crunch of gravel under our feet echoing through the empty streets. The air was cool and crisp, carrying with it a faint scent of decay and neglect. I shouldered my camera, ready to capture every moment of our exploration. "All right, team," Emily said, her voice steady and calm. "Let's stick together and keep our eyes peeled. We don't know what we're walking into here." We nodded in agreement and set off down the main street. The first thing that struck me was the orderliness of the abandonment. There were no signs of struggle or panic, just an eerie sense of sudden departure. Doors were left ajar, and personal items lay scattered about, as if the inhabitants had simply vanished mid-task. Our footsteps echoed through the empty corridors of the buildings we explored. Each house told a story: a half-eaten meal on a dining table, a child's toy left discarded on the floor, a book open to a well-loved page. It was as if the people had just stepped out for a moment, intending to return, but never did. As we delved deeper into the city, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. I couldn't shake the sensation of eyes on my back, a prickling at the nape of my neck. I glanced at the others, seeing the same unease reflected in their expressions. In one of the houses, we discovered a diary tucked away in a bedside drawer. The leather cover was worn, and the pages were filled with neat, looping handwriting. The entries started out mundane, detailing daily life in the city. But as the pages turned, the tone grew increasingly desperate. "Listen to this," I said, my voice barely above a whisper as I read aloud. "The shadows are growing bolder. I can hear them whispering at night, calling out to us. I don't know what they want, but I'm afraid. We all are. Something is happening here. Something terrible." A shiver ran down my spine as I finished reading. The others looked at me, their faces pale. We knew we were onto something, but the reality of it was chilling. As the day wore on, we continued our exploration, the tension building with each passing hour. We found more evidence of the strange occurrences: scribbled notes, makeshift barricades, and signs of hasty departures. But it was the silence that was the most unnerving. The complete absence of life in a place that should have been bustling with activity. That night, as we huddled together in one of the abandoned houses, reviewing the footage we had captured, we heard it. The faint sound of footsteps echoing through the empty streets. We froze, listening intently, but the sound faded away as quickly as it had come. "Did you hear that?" Chris whispered, his eyes wide. We nodded, the reality of our situation sinking in. We weren't alone in the city, and whatever was out there knew we were here. With a sense of foreboding hanging heavy in the air, we prepared to face whatever the night would bring, knowing that our journey into the heart of the abandoned city was far from over. The next morning, we woke up to the faint light of dawn filtering through the dusty windows. The events of the previous night had left us all on edge, and the silence of the city seemed even more oppressive in the early morning light. We quickly packed our gear and set out to continue our exploration, determined to uncover more about the mysterious disappearances. Our first stop was the old school at the heart of the city. The building was imposing, its once white walls now stained with age and neglect. As we pushed open the creaky doors, the scent of old books and chalk dust filled the air. The silence inside was almost reverential, broken only by the distant echo of our footsteps. We made our way through the dimly lit hallways, the beam of my camera light cutting through the gloom. The classrooms were eerily preserved, as if the students had just stepped out for a moment. But it was the artwork on the walls that caught our attention. Drawings made by the children, depicting shadowy figures watching them from the corners of the rooms. The images were crude but unsettling, the heavy black lines seeming to leap off the page. "These are creepy," Laura murmured, tracing her fingers over one of the drawings. "It's like the kids were seeing something the adults weren't." Chris nodded, his expression grim. "And look at this," he said, holding up a small notebook filled with similar sketches. "It's like they were obsessed with these figures." As we delved deeper into the school, the atmosphere grew increasingly oppressive. The air felt thick, and the silence was almost suffocating. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing up, the sensation of being watched growing stronger with each passing moment. Suddenly, Chris held up a hand, signaling for us to stop. He adjusted his headphones, listening intently to something on his audio equipment. "Do you hear that?" he whispered, his eyes wide. We all froze, straining to listen. At first, there was nothing, but then I heard it, a faint whispering sound, like voices murmuring just out of earshot. It seemed to come from all around us, echoing through the empty hallways. "What is that?" Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Chris shook his head, his expression grim. "I don't know, but it's like they're responding to us." A shiver ran down my spine as the whispers grew louder, the sound seeming to press in on us from all sides. We quickly made our way out of the school, the need to escape the oppressive atmosphere overriding our desire to explore further. Back outside, we took a moment to catch our breath, the sunshine a welcome relief from the darkness of the school. But our respite was short-lived. As we stood there, we noticed something strange, a faint trail of disturbed dust leading away from the school and towards an old boarded-up building on the outskirts of the city. Following the trail, we made our way to the building, its faded sign proclaiming it to be the old city library. The doors were locked tight, but a quick search revealed a hidden basement entrance, partially concealed by overgrown weeds. With a sense of trepidation, we made our way inside, the beam of our flashlights cutting through the inky blackness. The basement was filled with old equipment and stacks of yellowed papers. As we began to sort through the mess, we realized that we had stumbled upon a makeshift laboratory. There were notes and diagrams scattered about, detailing experiments conducted by the city's inhabitants in the days leading up to their disappearance. "Look at this," Laura said, holding up a faded photograph. It showed a group of people huddled around a strange device, their expressions a mix of fear and determination. "It's like they were trying to communicate with something." Emily nodded, her expression grim. And whatever it was, it didn't want to be communicated with. As we continued to explore the basement, we found more evidence of the desperate measures the inhabitants had taken in their attempts to understand the mysterious presence haunting their city. But it was the final entry in a dusty journal that sent a chill down my spine. "The experiment was a failure," I read aloud, my voice barely above a whisper. "Whatever we have unleashed, it is beyond our control. It is too late for us, but perhaps it is not too late for others. Beware the shadows, for they are the harbingers of doom." With a sense of foreboding hanging heavy in the air, we made our way back to the surface, the weight of our discovery pressing down on us. We knew that we were treading on dangerous ground, and that the truth of what had happened in the city was more terrifying than any of us could have imagined. As night fell, we huddled together in our makeshift camp, the events of the day weighing heavily on our minds. We knew that we were not alone in the city, and that whatever was out there was growing bolder with each passing moment. and as the whispers echoed through the empty streets, we couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming for us, something dark and malevolent and utterly beyond our control. The third day dawned with a sense of urgency. We knew we were onto something big, something that could explain the mass disappearance, but also something that put us in grave danger. The whispers from the night before still echoed in our minds, a haunting reminder of the unseen presence lurking in the shadows. Our first order of business was to trace the source of the strange sounds Chris had picked up on his audio equipment. We followed the faint signals, our footsteps echoing through the empty streets as we made our way to the outskirts of the city. The trail led us to an old factory, its towering smokestacks standing like sentinels against the pale morning sky. The old factory was a labyrinth of rusted machinery and faded signs. As we ventured deeper into the building, the air grew colder, and the sense of being watched intensified. The beam of my camera light flickered over the walls, revealing more of the crude drawings we had seen in the school, shadowy figures looming large and menacing. "This place gives me the creeps," Laura murmured, her voice barely audible over the distant hum of unseen machinery. I nodded in agreement, my heart pounding in my chest. "We need to stay alert. Whatever is here, it doesn't want us poking around." As we explored the factory, we stumbled upon a hidden room, tucked away behind a crumbling wall. Inside, we found more evidence of the desperate experiments conducted by the city's inhabitants. There were notes and diagrams scattered about, detailing their attempts to communicate with the unknown entity. But it was the final entries in a dusty logbook that sent a chill down my spine. "The entity has grown stronger," I read aloud, my voice barely above a whisper. "It feeds on our fear, growing more powerful with each passing day. We have tried to contain it, to reason with it, but it is beyond our control. It is only a matter of time before it consumes us all." A sudden noise echoed through the factory, the sound of metal clanging against metal. We froze, listening intently as the sound grew louder, closer. Without warning, shadowy figures darted out from the darkness, moving swiftly and silently through the machinery. We caught only glimpses of them, but it was enough to send a jolt of terror coursing through our veins. "Run!" Emily shouted, her voice echoing through the cavernous space. We turned and fled, our hearts pounding in our chests as we raced through the labyrinthine corridors of the factory. The figures pursued us, their footsteps echoing ominously behind us. We could hear their whispers, the sound seeming to press in on us from all sides. In our haste to escape, we became separated. I glanced back to see Chris stumble and fall behind a pile of rusted machinery. I skidded to a halt, turning back to help him, but Emily grabbed my arm, pulling me forward. "We have to keep moving," she urged, her eyes wide with fear, with a heavy heart. I turned and followed her, the sound of Chris's cries for help echoing behind us. We burst out of the factory, the bright sunlight momentarily blinding us after the dimness of the interior. We paused, gasping for breath, the reality of our situation sinking in. "We have to go back for Chris," I insisted, my voice trembling with a mix of fear and determination. Emily nodded, her expression grim. "We will, but we need a plan. We can't just rush back in there unprepared." Laura, who had been scanning the area, suddenly pointed towards a nearby building. "Look, there's an entrance to an underground tunnel over there. Maybe it leads back to the factory." With renewed hope, we made our way to the building, the entrance to the tunnel hidden behind a crumbling wall. Armed with our flashlights and a fierce determination, we ventured into the darkness, the beam of light cutting through the inky blackness. The tunnel was narrow and claustrophobic, the air thick with dust and the scent of decay. We moved cautiously, our footsteps echoing ominously through the confined space. The walls were lined with pipes and wires, the remnants of a long-forgotten infrastructure. As we delved deeper into the tunnel, we came across a hidden chamber, the walls lined with old equipment and faded notes. It was a secret laboratory, the heart of the experiments conducted by the city's inhabitants. And there, in the center of the room, was Chris, bound to a chair, his eyes wide with fear. "Chris!" I exclaimed, rushing to his side. He looked up at us, relief flooding his features. "You came back for me," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Emily nodded, her expression determined. "We couldn't leave you behind. Now let's get you out of here." As we worked to free Chris from his bonds, he revealed the chilling truth about the entity. "It's still active," he said, his voice trembling with fear. "It's been watching us, manipulating us. It wants us to stay here, to become a part of it." A shiver ran down my spine as the reality of our situation sank in. We were not just dealing with a mysterious disappearance, but with a malevolent force that sought to consume us all. And as we made our way back through the tunnel, the whispers echoing through the darkness, we knew that our fight for survival was far from over. The realization that we were being manipulated by an unseen force sent a wave of terror through our group. We knew we had to escape the city, but the entity's influence seemed to permeate every corner. Our only hope was to outsmart it, to use our knowledge of its tactics against it. We huddled together in the dimly lit tunnel, our breaths visible in the cold air. Chris, though shaken, was determined to help us formulate a plan. "We need to create a distraction," he said, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. "Something big enough to draw its attention away from us." Emily nodded in agreement. "We can use the equipment in the factory. If we can overload the systems, it might give us enough time to make a run for it." With a plan in place, we set to work. Laura and I ventured back into the factory, our footsteps echoing through the cavernous space. We moved cautiously, the ever-present whispers a constant reminder of the entity's presence. Using our combined knowledge of the machinery, we rigged the systems to overload, setting a timer to give us a head start. Meanwhile, Emily and Chris prepared our escape route, mapping out the quickest way back to our van. They gathered our equipment, ensuring we had everything we needed to make a swift exit. The tension was palpable, the air thick with anticipation and fear. As the timer counted down, we took our positions, ready to make a dash for freedom. The seconds ticked by agonizingly slowly, each one feeling like an eternity. And then, with a deafening roar, the factory exploded into a blaze of light and sound. We ran, our hearts pounding in our chests as we raced through the empty streets. The entity's whispers grew louder, more insistent, as it realized our deception. Shadowy figures darted out from the darkness, their forms flickering in and out of existence as they tried to block our path. Laura stumbled, crying out in pain as she twisted her ankle. I scooped her up, carrying her as we continued our desperate flight. The van was in sight, a beacon of hope in the midst of the chaos. Emily threw open the doors and we piled inside, our breaths coming in ragged gasps. Chris gunned the engine, the tires kicking up dust as we sped away from the city. Looked back, watching as the shadows receded into the distance, their forms dissolving into the empty streets. We had made it, but the experience had left us shaken to the core. The drive back to civilization was a blur of tension and relief. We couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, the entity's presence lingering like a shadow on our minds. But, as the miles stretched out behind us, the whispers faded away, replaced by the comforting hum of the engine. Back in the safety of our own world, we made a pact never to speak of what had happened in the abandoned city. The truth was too terrifying, too unbelievable to share with anyone else. But sometimes, in the quiet moments, I could still hear the whispers, feel the entity's gaze upon me. It was a reminder of the horrors we had faced and the knowledge that some things were better left forgotten. Yet, despite the fear, there was a sense of triumph. We had faced the unknown and survived, our bond strengthened by the shared ordeal. And as we looked to the future, we knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, we could face them together, stronger and more resilient than ever before.